Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Lost Bits right here on TetraBitGaming, the series where we explore the scrapped, unused, and unseen content in video games. So ever since I uploaded my Cuphead and Five Nights at Freddy's Lost Bits, a lot of you guys have been asking me to make a Lost Bits video for Bendy and the Ink Machine. Well, ask and you shall receive, as today I'll be looking at the first 2 chapters of the game. Really quickly before we start, I just want to thank Amino for sponsoring this video. Amino is an awesome app where you can connect to a huge variety of different communities, with of course one of those being the Bendy community, home to over 100,000 fans united by their love of the series. Since starting with the Bendy series, I've been checking into the Bendy Amino to read up on some interesting theories, learn about secrets I missed during my first playthrough, and of course checking out some fan art of Boris. He sure is a good boy. As part of this sponsorship, for the next week I will be hosting the TetraBit Challenge on the Bendy Amino. For this challenge, you'll need to download the Amino app and join the Bendy Amino. Once there, tap the pencil on the bottom right of the screen and submit your best fan art as a blog post to the Bendy Amino with the hashtag TetraBitChallenge. And at the end of the challenge, I will choose my favorite submission and use it as my profile picture in the Amino. So if you would like to enter the challenge, be sure to check out Amino for free by using the link in the description or pinned comment, and in the app, search for the Bendy Amino. Anyways, without further delay, go grab yourself a tall glass of ink. It's time to find some lost bits. So if you're unfamiliar with the development of Bendy and the Ink Machine, basically every time a new chapter has been released, all of the previously released chapters have gotten pretty significant updates, from better lighting to entirely new rooms. So much of what I'll be discussing may have been used at some point, but as of the newest Chapter 4 updates present at the time of making this video, these things were either altered or removed. So with that in mind, let's press on. Alright, so I'll go through the chapters in order. So first up is Chapter 1, Moving Pictures. Being the first chapter, this one has gone through the most changes, and as such has the most differences and scrapped content. For example, originally this room was boarded off and inaccessible before it eventually became the artist's studio in future updates. The other very notable example is the change to the ink machine itself. Originally, the ink machine was found in a somewhat small room, but in the latest update, the room and ink machine itself were changed and made to be much larger, and you can no longer actually walk up to the ink machine. This change certainly added to the grandeur and mystery of the ink machine. Some of the characters in this chapter also underwent an overhaul. First, we can see that the Boris clone underwent some pretty big changes. At first, his model, although still creepy, was pretty basic in style compared to that of the one seen in the most current update. Everything from Boris's size, clothing, face, and incision were altered. Similarly, Bendy himself also underwent some changes. Here is what Bendy looked like originally. Since then, his head design was altered, and then finally in the current update he was made to be much skinnier and almost skeleton-like. Also, you might notice that Bendy now only has a glove on his left hand instead of both. Why this was changed is still unknown. And speaking of Bendy changes, it appears that there is an unused version of the jump scare towards the end of the chapter. Originally, it seems that instead of reaching at the player and then sinking down, Bendy would instead slowly tear down the boards after the jump scare. After completing this task, a door would shut him in. This video clip is actually uploaded to YouTube as an unlisted video by Mike Mood, one of the co-creators of the Meatly Games, the studio which created this game. Anyways, this lost finale was likely changed because it would remove the sense of danger and urgency if the player could just see Bendy get locked up in that room. It also doesn't really make sense since initially this room isn't boarded up, and it is likely Bendy who boarded up the door before the player returns to the ink machine. So why would he then try to take down the boards right after just putting them up? In future updates, Bendy's jump scare was changed, along with his design from just popping up, looking around, and sinking back down, to actually trying to grab the player. Additionally, Bendy's jump scare shriek as well as Henry's reaction were also removed.
I'm getting the hell out of here.
One of the other decently big changes in the first chapter was the audio heard when the projector turns on in the projector room when Henry returns to increase the flow pressure. The first song used here was Hellfire Follies. This song was then changed to a song titled You Left Me in a Heartbeat. This song has since also been scrapped in favor of just a whistling tune. There's also one other small change that can be noted in Bendy's 2D drawn design. This difference is the design on his gloves, which was changed from 3 lines to 2 circles. This change is seen in all of the cutouts as well as all the posters throughout the chapter. The only real reason that I can think of for this change is that with the 2 circles, I guess Bendy's gloves kind of look like a skull from afar, and if you squint hard enough. It's a bit of a stretch, but I really can't think of any other reason why this would be altered. There are also 2 completely unused portraits that were intended to be found in the Chapter 1's break room, where you bring all the items you need to search for before turning on the ink machine. One of these just looks like an ink splat, and the other which looks like stitches repairing some sort of tear. These suggest that either the game was planned to have the player find 8 objects instead of 6, or these were just early versions of the ones used in the final release. If 8 objects were intended to be found, this was likely changed to make the hunt not overly tedious. As it's been theorized, each of the portraits is meant to represent a character in the game as well as a department in Joey Drew's studio. The inkwell for Harry and the artists, the record for the musicians, the wrench for the repair team, and so forth. So based on this, the stitching might have been an early design for the department dealing with the Bendy plushie doll, and the ink splatter an early design for the artists. Either this, or these portraits were intended for 2 other departments. And the Chapter 1 content doesn't stop here. There's also some unused wooden square textures, the second of which appears to resemble some sort of electrical socket. Whether this socket had an intended use or what it might have been is of course still a mystery. The next unused textures found in the prototype Chapter 1 files are that of a Bendy Mask and a pair of Bendy gloves. Apparently these were meant to be used in a physical form of Bendy, either an even older prototype of the Bendy that jump scares you, or perhaps an early statue of Bendy's 2D design. Furthermore, a file exists that shows the early textures of Henry's animation desk. The desks have since been stylized to look more wooden. The weird part here is that the file has a circle texture at the top that goes completely unused, and its purpose is still a mystery. And similar to the desks, the cobweb scene around the stage also got an update. Here is what they used to look like. 2 other cosmetic changes to Chapter 1 are that originally, this station to increase the flow rate simply had a button with the word flow on it instead of the turn wheel we now see. And the second is that this sign used to say main power instead of ink machine like it does now. Next up, several audio files were also altered leading to the current release of the chapter. For one, all of Henry's lines have been changed to sound more deep and echoey. Here's an example.
So this is the ink machine, huh? Wonder how you turn it on. So this is the ink machine, huh? Wonder how you turn it on.
And while we're on the topic of unused audio, here are a few more tracks that aren't tied to any one particular chapter. The first 2 sounds are just some unused loud beeps. Judging by their name, it's a pretty safe bet to assume that these were just placeholder sounds at one point in development. The next 2 audio clips are my favorite. Let's have a listen.
Boo, you lose! Suck. Woo, yeah! Right on.
These definitely seem like some sort of developer joke and were again likely placeholder clips used in development at some point. Next is the sound that would play when the player unlocked a trophy in the Game Jolt version of the game. Since Chapter 3 was released, you can no longer get the game on Game Jolt, and as such, this sound is no longer used. Okay, and with that, we're finally done with Chapter 1, so now let's move on to Chapter 2, The Old Song. Again, like with Chapter 1, there have been some changes to this level and its characters. The first characters to undergo a change are the Searchers, and they were given a much more reflective look, more fingers, as well as a more detailed face. And the other character to undergo quite the change is Sammy Lawrence. Originally, his overalls were, a little too big if you ask me. I mean, come on, he's basically swimming in those things. Sammy was also made more muscular and given some proper shoes instead of just having some weird looking stumps. His Bendy Mask, while mostly staying the same, now has a slightly smaller hole and it is no longer double-sided. Chapter 2 has also had some more additions from the first release, such as this billiards room, the expanded infirmary with the underground tunnels, and of course the extension to Sammy's hidden sanctuary, where his super secret toilet was added. I mean, who wouldn't want to pinch a loaf right beside some large pipes and valve controls? Another big change to Chapter 2 were the altered respawn points. In the first release of the chapter, they were pentagrams drawn with ink with a pulsing black ink blob at the center. This design seems to be made up from 5 layers of the pentagram seen at the end of Chapter 1, each rotated by 72 degrees. Since the release of Chapter 3, these spawn points have been changed to the Bendy statues that we still see to this day. Of course, it is still unknown as to why this change was made. My guess is the developers wanted to have a bigger emphasis on Bendy being the ultimate evil instead of some more generic styled Satanist symbolism. Next up is an unused cement floor texture. The only place that I could see this being used is in the lower level sewer-like tunnels. Otherwise, the cement floor really doesn't fit with the style of the game seen pretty much elsewhere in this level. Thankfully enough, I was able to find a way to clip through walls, floors, and ceilings, so as usual for the last stop in this video, I will explore the first 2 chapters of the game to see if there is anything that is normally unseen. First off, I thought it would be cool to see what's behind the boarded up door that would eventually become the artist's studio in the first chapter. Well, looks like we have... Hello? Yeah, everyone meet the special, normally unseen cardboard cutout of Bendy, known as the Wandering Sin. We'll be seeing lots of him for the rest of the video. This guy stares at you menacingly and holds up a sign that reads, "Wandering is a terrible sin." As you get closer, an ominous droning sound will get louder and louder. These guys are pretty creepy, and when I first saw them, I was really scared of getting too close because I thought some sort of jump scare would happen. Now these guys are found pretty much everywhere that you would want to explore, but is normally inaccessible. The developers obviously knew that players would get curious and would want to explore, so the Wandering Sin was their sort of deterrent to try and scare fans off from looking where they aren't supposed to. For example, ever wondered what's behind the exit door at the start of the chapter? You guessed it, another Wandering Sin. You know, let's just call him Sinny from now on. In the same room, we can see that this here unseen light is used to generate the effect of the light under the door seen on the other side. This same effect is used later on in this chapter in the radio room. And speaking of lights, back at the soon-to-be artist room, if we go look up the once mysterious stairs, we can also see a light coming from nothing. Nice. There's also a blocked off path in the lounge area here that is super ominous but never really further explored. Of course, I also wanted to see what was behind this barricade. After getting through and going down below the hatch, there was a decently long staircase with Sinny waiting for us at the end. In the latest version of Chapter 1, we can go beneath the floor and see the ink machine still loaded, just waiting to be pulled up. And since we aren't normally supposed to get down here, looking back to the balcony, we can see that much of the wall is untextured for obvious reasons. I also tried to go behind Bendy before his jump scare to see if it would still work if I was there, but unfortunately, it looks like you have to be behind the barricade in order to trigger the cutscene. Now moving on to Chapter 2, which has so far the most hidden Sinnies out of all of the chapters. But before we get to those, there's also the part towards the beginning of this chapter that we can see Sammy Lawrence carrying a Bendy cutout. Normally, when we reach the end of the hallway, Sammy has disappeared without a trace. I was curious to see how this was done, and it turns out it was nothing special. Sammy quite literally just disappears. There are 2 normally inaccessible places that I also wanted to check out in the recording room. The balcony where the Bendy cutouts and eventually Sammy Lawrence stare down at you from, as well as the vocal recording booth. Up at the balcony, we can first see the stack of Bendy cutouts. Now if you didn't know, every time you turn on the projector, another one of these will be called and placed at the balcony when you're downstairs, or down in the recording room when you're looking down from the projector room. And if we go a little bit further in this path, our first cine of the chapter can be seen. There is also another blocked off mysterious path here, but going further just reveals an unfinished and blocked off stairway. Next up is the vocal recording booth. After going inside, this door is actually functional for some reason, and will then reveal yet another room with ya boy Cine. It's odd that this door is functional. I'm quite certain the developers expected players would try to go here. By now you might have noticed that I'm not playing on the most current release of this chapter, and that's simply because, for whatever reason, many of the Wandering Sins were removed in the current release, namely the two that we just saw. That being said, the newest release has one cool thing to check out that is present in the newly added tunnel section. At one point we can look back and see the shadow of Sammy Lawrence just standing menacingly. Well, if we go and have a look, it turns out Sammy isn't even looking in the right direction, and he is just staring towards the flickering light, which is again coming from nothing. Also, if we go down to Sammy's ritual room before we are supposed to, we can see him just standing there, asserting his dominance. When getting here normally, after his monologue, Sammy will go off screen into another room where he is presumably killed by Bendy. In a normal playthrough, this room becomes locked and is inaccessible, but if we force our way in, we can just see Sammy hanging out, doing his own thing, and also Cine peeking from behind. Before Bendy spawns, if you stand in this ink square and look up, you can see there is some sort of room up there. Turns out it's a secret hallway with probably the most ominous Wandering Sin, as it appears this one was some sort of shrine to him. And yes, those two gray Bendy heads are just shrunken down respawn statues. Now it was at this point the graphics and collision of the chapter kind of got messed up. Fortunately, this let me get nice and close to Bendy and have a good look at him. There's also another blocked off hallway where this Cine can be found, although normally he'll actually be on the wall. And finally, at the end of the chapter, we can see Boris just hanging out off screen, waiting for the cutscene to start. Beside him is of course the last hidden Cine of the chapter. And with that, guys, concludes this Lost Bits video on the first two chapters of Bendy and the Ink Machine, and I hope you enjoyed it. Of course, be on the lookout for the follow-up video on chapters 3 and 4, and eventually 5, coming out very soon. Once the chapter 3 and 4 video is uploaded, be sure to check it out by clicking on the card right here. Also, let me know what other Lost Bits you'd like to see next. If you enjoyed this video and would like to stay up to date with me and the channel, be sure to subscribe and follow me over on my other social media pages, which will all be linked in the description below. But as always, guys, thank you all so much for watching today and for all of your amazing support, and I will see you in a bit.